On August 15th, the Taliban took control of the presidential palace in Kabul, Afghanistan. The U.S. scrambled to evacuate Americans, and in tragic scenes of despair, tens of thousands of Afghans who worked side by side with Americans struggled to escape the possibility of Taliban reprisals. Some escaped. Many did not. It marked a grim end to America's longest war, and it should force us to reflect on what we've learned in the 2 decades since George W. Bush launched the so-called global war on terror, including why it was built to have no end. Every year on September 11th, the United States stops to reflect. It is a somber day when we remember images of skies strewn with smoke, the Twin Towers collapsing, a scene I witnessed myself from the Brooklyn waterfront. We remember the Pentagon in flames, the U.S. Capitol on lockdown, and a fiery field in Pennsylvania where a group of Americans sacrificed themselves to save others. This year, as we mark the 20th anniversary of one of our darkest days, it's also worth considering what has been lost since that day. In the days following the attacks, then President Bush and his administration set in motion a string of events that would profoundly change the course of our foreign policy, our politics, and our sense of purpose in the world. In the 20 years since, over 7,000 U.S. troops have died in Afghanistan and Iraq. More than 30,000 post-9/11 veterans have committed suicide. Hundreds of thousands of Afghans and Iraqis have also died, and 37 million people have been displaced by our post-9/11 conflicts. Meanwhile, the price tag of the wars, and caring for those who fought them, is approaching $7 trillion, resources that could have been used to deal with other dangers: inequality, pandemic preparedness, the climate crisis. At home, we've seen an erosion of civil liberties, the creation of vast new bureaucracies, from the Department of Homeland Security to ICE, and the betrayal of our values through policies that authorize torture and indefinite detention. We've also seen our identity distorted, the darker currents of our history tapped into. After 9/11, an us versus them right-wing political and media apparatus stirred up anger against Americans who were not sufficiently committed to the war on terror and hyped the threat of an encroaching Islamic other. As the 9/11 attacks receded into memory, the nature of that other shifted. Fear-mongering about terrorism and conspiracy theories about creeping Sharia morphed into fear-mongering about immigrants at the southern border, anger at athletes who took a knee during the national anthem, and conspiracy theories about everything from Benghazi to voter fraud. Ironically, this redirection of the xenophobic currents of our post-9/11 politics ended up fueling terrorism rather than fighting it, from Charlottesville to the Tree of Life synagogue. It also contributed to once unthinkable authoritarian scenarios, when fellow citizens are relentlessly cast as enemies of the state. Even a violent American insurrection on the U.S. Capitol can become real. So with 20 years now separating us from the events that spiraled into the global war on terror, it's long past time to revisit why things got so bad and how we can begin to repair them. And in order to do that, let's go back 60 years prior to a different attack on American soil. On December 7, 1941, Imperial Japanese fighters attacked the Pearl Harbor Naval Base in Honolulu, Hawaii, then a U.S. territory. It was a devastatingly effective surprise attack, killing 2,400 people and wounding over 1,000 more. The following day, President Roosevelt delivered a famous speech to Congress and requested a formal declaration of war.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
The resolution passed the Senate unanimously and received only one nay vote in the House. Ultimately, Roosevelt signed the declaration just hours after giving the speech. The United States Constitution grants Congress the power to declare war. So historically speaking, if the U.S. is under threat and wishes to engage in a drawn-out military conflict, the President asks Congress to declare war. And if they do, the Commander-in-Chief, the President, manages the war effort. The framers of the Constitution intentionally separated the power to declare war from the power to run a war. They believed no one individual should have the power to involve the entire country in an endless military conflict. But after World War II, the nature of war became very different, and so did congressional involvement. Perhaps congressional representatives were fearful of the political ramifications of costly wars and preferred that the burden of military action fall to the president. Or maybe it was just rapidly evolving technology, long-range missiles, atomic bombs, proxy conflicts, and more covert operations, side effects to the Cold War that shifted our understanding of what war itself is. But whatever it might have been, the last time the United States Congress officially declared war was World War II. Now there were, of course, other wars. The Korean War was considered a police action. The Vietnam War began with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which basically granted the president warlike powers without declaring war. After the Vietnam War, Congress passed the War Powers Act, which was supposed to rein in the president's power to wage open-ended wars by requiring a form of congressional authorization. So, after 9/11, Bush doesn't ask Congress to declare war, but he does ask for a blank check to wage it.
This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
3 days later, on September 14th, 2001, Congress passed the 2001 Authorization for the Use of Military Force. Now, what was unique about this authorization is not what was included in it, but what wasn't included. There was no time frame specified, no geographic limitation. It's a permission slip that allows the president to go to war with any country or organization or individual that he determines is associated with Al-Qaeda. And this blank check isn't just issued to Bush, it's issued to anybody with the title of president. On September 18th, 1 week after the attacks, Bush signs the authorization into law. 2 days later, the president speaks to the nation and offers an ambiguous timeline to this new war.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
Now, a war that doesn't end until every group that inflicts terror around the world is defeated seems inevitably infinite and hard to define. You can see where this could go wrong. Bush began military action in Afghanistan just weeks after his address to Congress. By mid-November, the capital city of Kabul had fallen, and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban were on the run. But instead of simply finishing the job against Al-Qaeda, Bush begins a project of nation building in Afghanistan. And then he decides to invade a different country, one that had nothing to do with 9/11. In 2002, the Bush administration went back to Congress, this time to ask for an authorization for the use of military force in Iraq. They claimed that Saddam Hussein had been developing weapons of mass destruction. Bush and other administration officials even tried to link Saddam to Al-Qaeda, although they had no evidence that the two were working together.
Al-Qaeda hides, Saddam doesn't. But the danger is that they work in concert. The danger is that Al-Qaeda becomes an extension of Saddam's madness and his hatred and his capacity to extend weapons of mass destruction around the world.
Despite their lack of evidence, the Bush administration tapped into the politics of fear to sell this expansion of the war on terror. In the end, the authorization received 133 nay votes in the House and 23 in the Senate, but still passed both houses overwhelmingly, with plenty of Democratic support. And so, with two blank checks in hand, Bush began the Iraq War in March of 2003. The Iraqi government collapsed almost immediately. Less than 2 months after the invasion began, George W. Bush appeared aboard an aircraft carrier under a banner that read, "Mission Accomplished." We know what happened next. An incompetent occupation, an insurgency that eventually morphed into ISIS, the discrediting of democracy itself, as Bush used it to justify the ongoing war. More aggressive policies from China and Russia to push back on an America that had overreached in Iraq. Mission accomplished. It's easy to make fun of, but it's also worth asking just what would constitute winning a war on terror. Terrorism is a tactic. You can't kill every terrorist. You can't eliminate a world in which there are pockets of violent extremist people. And you can't negotiate peace with extremists who reject it as a matter of belief.
We will never negotiate.
The United States of America doesn't negotiate with terrorists.
We don't negotiate with terrorists.
Whoa.
So what happens if you're fighting a war on terror? You don't end it.
The presenting sponsor of Crooked History is Demz, the first of its kind investment fund that through extensive research ensures you're only investing in S&P 500 companies that donate over 75% of their contributions to Democratic causes and candidates. You can finally put your money where your vote is. Search for the Demz ticker, that's DEMZ, wherever you invest, or visit Demz.fund to learn more. Carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risk factors, charges, and expenses before investing. This and additional information can be found in the fund's summary or full prospectus, which may be obtained by visiting Demz.fund. Whew!
As Bush's presidency drew to a close, with the U.S. economy in freefall and the military entering an 8th year of war, a newly elected President Obama and his team took office, and we learned just how much harder it is to end wars than begin them. We inherited 180,000 troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, and by January of 2009, the scope of the war on terror had stretched out to several other countries. During his 8 years in office, President Obama did make some significant progress in winding down pieces of the war. Torture was prohibited, new protections were put in place to protect civilians, the number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan and Iraq fell from 180,000 to roughly 15,000. But the scope of the war on terror was massive, and parts of it were growing. By the end of President Obama's time in office, the U.S. military had conducted operations under the 2001 AUMF in at least 24 countries. An infrastructure of drone strikes cost far too many civilian lives. Continued support for autocratic allies undermined American rhetoric about democracy. When President Trump took office, he kept American boots on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan and dropped record numbers of bombs on the country. Around the world, he increased the number of drone strikes carried out by the U.S. and loosened the restrictions against drone usage. He increased American support for autocratic allies like Saudi Arabia, deploying more troops to the Persian Gulf, and vetoed a congressional law which demanded that he stop American support for a Saudi-led war in Yemen that was causing a humanitarian crisis. Which brings us to today. It's now been 20 years since the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. 4 different presidents have now taken part in the war on terror, all under the authorization first granted to Bush in September of 2001. Of course, some action was necessary to defend America after 9/11. And to be sure, there have been important achievements. We've not seen another 9/11-style attack. The Al-Qaeda of 2001 has been almost completely eliminated. Osama bin Laden was killed. ISIS rolled back. But the countries that hosted the most intense fighting of the war on terror are mired in various degrees of conflict. Afghanistan has been taken over by the Taliban. Iraq remains riven by intercommunal rivalry and Iranian influence. Libya, Somalia, and Yemen all host brutal proxy wars. Between 2001 and 2018, the number of active Sunni Islamist militants quadrupled. American foreign policy needs an overhaul to focus on dangers like climate change and pandemic disease, both of which are taking American lives right now. American politics needs to be detoxified, restoring our example as a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy, one that lives up to the story we tell the world. And America's forever war needs to be ended, with the legal authority for counterterrorism much more narrowly tailored, with the excesses of our counterterrorism machine dismantled, and with compassion for the people caught in its wake, starting with the hundreds of thousands of Afghan refugees who should be welcomed to the United States and allied countries. That effort at improvement should begin where it's supposed to in a democracy, with the law. It's time for Congress to once again take responsibility for war powers. It's time to repeal the post-9/11 authorization that sustains forever war. It is time to scale back a bloated defense budget of over $700 billion per year. It is time to elevate diplomacy and development in our engagement with the world. It is time to refocus national policy and reconstruct the kind of government that can prioritize the most pressing challenges of our time: revitalizing democracy, combating inequality, promoting opportunity, and protecting the planet.